So hello, thanks everyone for joining. Today's seminar is about navigating the publishing journey from PhD student to scholars. And before we start the seminar, I would like to acknowledge the land from which I'm speaking, which is Noongar country in the southwest of Western Australia. And I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and all the other lands from where people are participating in the seminar. So we have three excellent panelists joining us today. So thanks very much for your time. We have Kuntala Lahiri-Dutt, Ida, Kubiszewski, and Dimity Phillips. Did I get that right, Ida?
Close enough.
So Kuntala is a professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy. Her research is on community livelihoods and natural resource management with a focus on resource development in communities. Ida is an associate professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy, and she's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a full member of the Club of Rome. She was a climate change negotiator in the Dominican Republic following adaptation and loss damage. And her work is in ecosystem services and energy and around environmental management. And sorry, let me get, I just have the information. Okay. And Dimity worked at the ANU Research Services Division as a Research Integrity Officer. She completed her doctorate in art history and curatorship in 2006 from the ANU, following an undergraduate history degree in medieval and contemporary art history. Since then, she has had various roles as a lecturer, art curator, and manager. So welcome, Kuntala, Dimity, and Ida. I'll just give the floor to you and you'll just share your screen or just talk whatever you feel most comfortable with.
So I'll go first as listed in the our program. Hello, everyone. Thank you for asking me to speak in this webinar today. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel with Ida and Dimity. Thank you, Ida and Dimity, also for being part of this. Look, Daura Nuna Nunawal, Yango Gulanin Gulai Nunawal Daura, which means I am on the land of Nanawal land, and I am accepting that this land was never ceded. So I will talk to you about publishing during your PhD. So that's the focus of my presentation, not just publishing, because there's lots of material. So let me start with that. You know, when we talk about publishing, there are three aspects to it: why publish, and with whom do we publish, and how do we publish. And interestingly, the internet is full of material. I mean, before coming to this webinar today, I had a good look at the internet, and I have put some of the resources for you in the later slides for you to have a look. So the how is very well known, and I will come to that a little bit, but why and with whom are the two important areas that I will quickly cover, because there are three panelists. I don't want to take a lot of time. So, you know, as you can read in the first quotation, it's really, publishing is like bearing yourself in public. And it is, when we write, we are wordsmiths. We're compelled to write, and you will be master wordsmiths at the end of your PhD thesis, writing, you know, 70, 80,000 words. But recently, I have noticed that particularly the PhD students graduating from Europe and also some from America, they are publishing as soon as they start their PhD. You know, the typical career path student doesn't exist nowadays. You know, the career path student is a student who finishes BA and then master's and then comes to do the PhD. Though most of our students come with a lot of experience, field experience, who have been to the field, who have done work, and for them, it is not difficult to start writing quickly. And that's what European universities have been encouraging, that you really, really need to start publishing. But publishing is also like stuffing a note in the bottle and hurtling it into the sea. We do not know where it is going to go. So don't worry about whether it's bad writing or good writing. So a very famous writer once said that I wrote a book, it sucked, and then I wrote 9 more, and they all sucked. And then I wrote, I learned about, went around, learned about writing, and then I wrote 1 more, and that was my best book. So oftentimes we keep producing, and then we get to the good results. So don't worry about coming out with your epic in your first writing. The say why I have explained. I'll quickly move on to with whom you will write. There's a nowadays with Google Scholar and ORCID, as soon as you start writing, you set up your ORCID ID, set up your Google Scholar site, and so on. But if you write with established scholars, sometimes your PhD supervisors or colleagues that senior colleagues, then you get a benefit. Your name gets associated with them. But there is also the possibility that you will get overshadowed. It is your work. Remember that this work is your blood and sweat, your brainchild. And depending on how much the supervisor has contributed, you can invite the supervisor perhaps to join you in writing. And in my mind, collaborative writing is really, really useful. It takes us a longer way. But perhaps collaborative writing is a good thing after you have done your PhD. Because if you are a non-PhD, if you are a student, then the likelihood is that you will be seen as the person who just did the rubbish work, and the primary author or the senior person is the one who's kindly lending his name to your paper, and so on. So this is very touchy and sensitive at your level. And then at the downward level also, I'm sure there are many ethical issues that Dimity will talk about, and I will leave them for Dimity to talk about. So this is something that, have a look at this. It is a simplification. It's downloaded from the internet, how to publish a research paper in an international journal. It's actually the most simplified diagram that complete your research, prepare the manuscript, submit the manuscript gets reviewed, decision or, the decision you receive, either accept or reject or revise, and then you publish. But when you between completing your research and preparing the manuscript, there is a very important step that is missed. What is your audience? What journal do you want to select? That's the crucial thing. As a young scholar, you should know that established journals actually nowadays, they have a policy of encouraging ECRs to publish in established journals. So you should target established, famous journals, the top journals, the people who you are citing. Where are they publishing? You should publish in those journals. And there are other metrics to look at. You can easily look at, you're aware of those things, I'm sure, that what is the impact factor, and and so on. So have a look at the journal, and don't go for any damn journal. So gradually you will see that once you get established, I get at least one email every day that I'm a journal of chemical engineering and agricultural science based in X country, and we're just one paper short of publication, this issue, would you like to publish with us? So don't go with those sorts of things. You use your brain, go to the websites of these different journals and select your journal very carefully. And then go through the journal's instructions, the formatting instructions. These are very, very important. If you send an article that is not formatted to the journal style, it's a surefire rejection you are inviting on yourself. First of all, you look at the number of words. Keep your journal articles have to be to the point. They are not a thesis chapter. They are not elaborate. They are not a book chapter. They are not elaborated, expanded, where you can embellish with your words, things, but they are really, really to the point. So 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 words is usually the maximum limit. Keep it within that format. I would suggest that for non-native English speakers, I am a non-native English writer, and in my early days of my career, I had made the mistake of just writing and publishing, not going through that, getting it edited by a professional editor. So professional editors, another person's eyes, a professional person's eyes on your writing is almost always helpful. And one thing I would also say, since you are at the beginning of your career, you really should avoid publishing in edited books and as book chapters, because they are not valuable these days. They were valuable 20 years ago. That was a different academic culture then. The academic culture has totally shifted in the last 15 years or so. So select your journal and then prepare the manuscript according to the journal's instructions, and then submit the manuscript. Remember, you create a folder in your computer, the submission folder. Some journals require you to separate everything, anonymize everything, because there will be a blind review. Usually peer reviews, when manuscript gets reviewed, these are blindly done. So that means you don't know the name of the reviewer doesn't know the name of you. And so, it'll go to your peers, probably people who are also working in the same field. And then you get a decision. Sometimes those decisions, the reviews, because they are blind, and somebody probably who doesn't know you as a person, they write really nasty things. Most of the time they are good reviews, but sometimes they are nasty and pointless. So what you do then is a response to reviewers comments, another Word file, and write down the comments and address them, and try to address them as best as you can, and each and every comment. If they are not relevant, if they are nasty, don't say this is nasty, but say that this is how I have addressed, this is why I cannot address the way you asked me to, and so on. And then, resubmit it, that revised version. So that's the process. And then if you want to go learn more about it, there's just tips after tips on how to publish. There's just plenty of material. I will send this PowerPoint presentation to Kat. And if you're interested, you can write to me or to Kat and get a copy of it, or just do your own research. Using these keywords, you can click on them. Almost all important commercial publishing houses, they have created their own sites to actually encourage young early career researchers to know about publishing and to write their own articles as soon as they start. So these are the, sort of 7 steps to publishing in a scientific journal. See, this is what I was talking about. Do not rush submitting your article for publication. I used to be like that. When I finished something, I felt like I'm raring to go. I want to submit, because I'm always, not able to meet the deadline that I set for myself and so on. But You get it edited, get it cleaned up, read and read and read. It works for me if I put it away for a few days or a few weeks and then come back to it, and then select an appropriate publication outlet, etc. You can read all this, so I won't go through it. This one last slide that gives you there are short videos as well on the internet, and I would recommend that you go through that. But the biggest recommendation that I would leave today with you is that you should not delay starting to publish. You should start publishing really early in your career. It's really important. And remember that where you publish, sort of brands you, so start publishing, target really, really important, appropriate, top level journals, and try to publish in those venues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kuntala. That was a great overview and some really useful tips for students and early career researchers. I sometimes think that publishing is a bit like being a musician, and sometimes you see those rock star musicians or academics who just, at the top, but obviously they didn't start there. They start by playing at tiny venues, maybe with one or two people in the crowd, and the same, you look at maybe some earlier work of people who now are really, really well cited, and they just, as Kuntala said, you have to start somewhere, start small, but of high quality. I think that's a really good take-home message. Yeah. So now I will give the floor to Dimity or Ida, whoever wants to go first.
You're muted, Dimity. Okay, you want to go last? That's fine. Okay, guys, camera's on. I want to see who I'm talking to. Come on, you can do it. Camera's on. Thank you. So I don't have slides. I want to keep this more informal. So if you guys have questions, kind of butt in, sort of ask questions. So basically, what I want to talk to you is about, so I'm just newly out of the early career stage. So I've been where you are not very long ago. Just getting off an early career ARC grant, kind of dealing with the publishing stuff too, still learning as I go kind of thing. And so I think with all of this is you have to remember where this publication thing started, right? So one of the questions I was asked is, how do I know whether to submit it into a general, more transdisciplinary journal versus a more specified journal? And you got to remember where this whole publication journals thing started. And in the old days, prior to the internet, there was academic societies. Each academic society had their own journal. Each member of the academic society got a physical copy, and they read every article through. And that's how you did things. So if you wanted a certain community within your field to read your stuff, you submitted it to that community. And that's how these specified journals became, because more societies grew, etc. I think with Kuntala said that in the last 15 years, the whole publishing scene has changed, and that's because of Google Scholar, basically. Now, nobody actually goes to a specific journal and looks up articles. You go to Google Scholar or some other database and you search, and you might notice what the journal is that you're looking at. You might not. So I think it's less important in terms of where actually you publish. I do agree with Kuntala that it has to be a high quality journal. So a good way to find journals is to go and look at your reference list at the bottom, and the journal that you're citing most will probably be the most related to what you're talking about. That's one. Two, Google Scholar has this metrics application where you can go in and get an H index. Everybody know what an H index is, by the way? Yes, no, come on, nods, shakes, anything. No, okay. H index is how an academic scholar, a scholar, anybody who publishes gets kind of ranked, right? So it's based on quality and quantity. So it's how many times your journal article, how many of your journal articles were cited that many times. So if you have 10 articles, they were all cited 10 times, your H index is 10. If you have 10 articles, but they were only cited up to 5 times, your H-index is 5, right? So it takes into account, it's not the best index, but it works. So it takes into quality and quantity in a lot of ways, right? But journals are given H indexes as well. So how many papers that year were cited that many times. So Google Scholar is really good at looking at those metrics. And so look up, let's say you're doing sustainability or management or policy, type into Google, Google Scholar metrics, type in policy and see what comes up and see how the list is ordered and what looks good. The other important one is impact factor for a journal. Everybody probably heard of impact factor. It's how it's ranked basically. Any journal with an impact factor will be in ISI Web of Science. So if you're curious whether a journal has an impact factor, if it's decent, go to the Web of Science. If it's in there, it's going to be decent. That's the best way to find sort of journals that are credible. So I agree with Kuntala about being careful where you publish. Make sure to publish in something that does have an impact factor. There's one exception to that rule, I would say, is if there's a new journal just coming out and you know it's by a decent publisher and it looks really good, it takes about 3 to 4 years before a journal gets an impact factor. So for example, I publish in ecosystem services quite a bit. When that journal came out, I think I had about 4 or 5 papers in that one before it got an impact factor. And then when the impact factor was given, it was about a 4 or 5. Which was pretty good. So the next thing about new journals too, if you know that they're going to be decent, is that it's probably a bit easier to publish because they're looking for papers. And so it might be just a good way to start. The important thing is not to get discouraged. You will get rejected. Kuntala's right. Some of those reviews will be super nasty. You can't take it personally. You know what? Yes, there's douches out there. You just got to kind of accept it, not be nasty back, respond. So if you get a review and there's, let's say, points about comments, put it into a Word document, split out all those specific points and address each single point individually. You don't have to do everything the reviewer says. And I think that's an important thing for early careers to know. There's suggestions to improve the paper. If you don't think that that comment improves your paper, don't do it. But you need to have a good reason why you're not doing it and why you don't agree. And you have to explain that in your response to reviewers, right? So it's very valid to say, I actually don't believe this is in the scope of this paper, and this is why. Because reviewers will basically ask you to do a whole different study because they think that one will be more interesting, and that's ridiculous. So you could say, this is outside the scope of the study, and that's okay, but you have to say why too. So with reviews, I think it's, you gotta just try. I've had a journal that got rejected from like 8 journals. It took me over 2 years to find a journal. It finally got published. It has like 400 citations now, so it's fine. That doesn't mean anything about the quality of the paper. The one thing you have to, even if it gets rejected, so I'm working on one now that just got rejected. It was sent out to review and the reviewers rejected it. I will resubmit it probably this weekend, but what I'm going to do first is go through the reviews, read them over, see if any of those actually go, oh yeah, that would make the paper better, and then work on the paper to improve it, even though I'm not sending it back to that journal. So get those ideas, how to improve it, so on. I also find, in terms of the question for transdisciplinary versus specific journals, is I think that the question posed was not quite a valid question because it made it sound like all the transdisciplinary journals have a low impact factor and all the specified to have a high impact factor. Look at Nature, look at Science, very transdisciplinary, one of the highest impact factors out there. So I think that with the internet, that's changing really quickly as well. It's not an either or. And I think the big question is what your goal with publishing is, right? So if you're publishing to get into a specific field or a specific department that's very traditional, I would say go for the small specific journals. That's important. If you're looking to be read widely, if you're looking to change the world, save the world kind of thing, odds are if you do it very specific, it's not going to get as widely read because the community is smaller. So go for the bigger transdisciplinary journals. Try to relate your article, even if it's on a specific thing, to something broader, something that will be of interest to more people. So I think, and either one is fine, but you have to decide what your own motivations are. On the co-authorship thing, I have a slightly different perspective to Kuntala on that. Sorry, Kuntala. I've always co-authored. If you look at my papers, they usually have quite a lot of co-authors. And I feel like co-authorship, even during your PhD, is important. So yes, Kuntala's right that you have to be careful not to be outshone by advised supervisors, so on. For your PhD, you should be first author anyways, because you're doing majority work. As a first author, you're not going to be outshone, right? Because your supervisor will be near the end of the list or further down the list. What I think is important with co-authorship is that in some ways, those papers are much harder to write than single author papers. Other people are sometimes a pain in the butt to deal with. They just are. People have their own ideas. People complain about how your writing style is. People, go, I don't think we should keep the paper this way. I think we should do this instead. They're just a pain in the butt. And that's valid, but they also add a very important perspective. And learning how to be a first author on a big group paper, I think is an important skill to learn. Because you have to learn how to manage that process. And you have to learn how to deal with everybody that has different views and different perspectives in a collaborative way, where at the end of the paper, you're still colleagues and you're still friends, right? And so I think having one or two of those papers during your PhD where your supervisor can go, you just had this big blowout with your co-author, how do I proceed? And that supervisor is there to actually advise you how to work with that person. So I think that learning experience is important because in your career, odds are you are going to have co-authors and you're going to be first author on a lot of these. The other benefit of co-authorship, I find, is that I tend to work on papers. I bring in co-authors when I'm writing a paper. I'm like, oh, I'm writing a whole section about inequality. I don't know anything about inequality. I'm going to bring in inequality colleagues. And then, oh, I'm kind of referring to this kind of. Let me have another colleague that's focused on this, read it to see if they want to be a co-author and add something. Oh, and I'm kind of maybe implying this. Maybe I'll have somebody else read it and become a co-author. So I kind of look for co-authors as they can add to the paper. Or I'm not a GIS specialist, but a map in this paper would be really cool. Maybe I should bring a GIS specialist to help me think through maps and add a sort of section, geographical section. So you start bringing in people as they help your paper improve. And at the end of the day, they might be hard to deal with because they're coming from different areas. They might not know each other. You're going to have a better, more impactful paper. It's not going to potentially go into a very specialized journal, but it's going to be read more. It's going to be cited more. It's going to be more interesting to a much broader group. The other thing I would recommend is that if you have a really cool paper that you're excited about, don't leave it in just the academic sphere. Write a conversation piece about it. Write a Guardian piece about it. Go and write a for public piece about it because it's going to get a lot of attention. And it's, I've published our conversation pieces from my papers and then within a day had about 20 interviews set up, which got much more broader attention and then hence more citations. And it's a positive feedback loop that happens. Don't just focus on the academic because if you're trying to change the world, academia will help, but it's not all there is to it. So I think with any of this and with your research, take a broader perspective as well, and make sure to take a step out and saying, what are my goals? Where do I want to take this? Do I really want to read this? Who would take this paper and do something really interesting that changes the world with it? And how do I get it into their hands? So that's it from me. I don't know if you guys want to ask questions. Does Dimity want to go next? And then we can do questions.
I'll go next because I've just realized my tablet is running out of batteries. That would be a nightmare. So hold on a second. Let me see if I can get it.
For the tips, that was extremely useful.
Okay, good. It's charging.
I made some notes. I had a few questions for you that I'll go after the students and after Dimity. Thank you.
So can I go ahead? Is that okay?
Of course, thank you.
All right. So really, a lot of the things that have been mentioned already by Ida and Kuntala have been, well, very much along the lines of what I was going to say. Basically, the majority of the stuff that comes into the Research Integrity Office, where people are confused, they're concerned, or it even might escalate to the point of research misconduct, usually comes down in terms of authorship to a lack of dialogue. It's usually people falling out, people coming into a collaborative relationship, a collaborative writing relationship with certain expectations, but nobody really communicating what those expectations are. And everything falls apart and you get arguments. There are a few different ways that you should approach this, but essentially, when you're going into a publication or a collaborative publication, assume nothing. Don't assume that other people know what you want. Don't assume that you know what they want. What you need to do is have a discussion. And this is right back at the beginning of the process. You decide that you want to publish. You write down who is your audience, who are you going to publish with, who would you like to work with? And then when you're writing who you want to work with, you need to ask yourself and them, what are their expectations? What are your expectations? You need to discuss, and this is a discussion that's going to have to keep happening throughout the entire process. It's not a one-stop thing. This happens the entire time. Who qualifies as an author? If you have a look at the Australian Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research, which is, look it up on Google, you will find it. There is also an authorship guide that has been published as well. And an author is someone who has made a significant intellectual or scholarly contribution to the research and its output and has agreed to be an author. So if those things are met, that person can be an author on your paper. If they don't want to be an author, or for some reason everyone's agreed that that person's not going to be an author, there has to be written agreement that that person is not going to be listed as an author. So if somebody is contributing to your paper and you don't want them on the paper, you can't leave their name off it unless everybody agrees to that and the person themselves agrees not to be listed. You also need to consider who will be acknowledged on the paper. So acknowledgement can be where somebody has participated or assisted in the writing of the paper, but they don't qualify as an author. That can be a wide range of people. It can include somebody who's actually done an illustration for you, artists, people who have conducted data collection, people who have actually done the data modeling. They're all different types of people that you should acknowledge. There's also you really need to be careful of acknowledging traditional knowledge as well. So if you are doing research that involves Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander community knowledge, you need to actually have permission to share that knowledge. You need to acknowledge the Indigenous or who the community that owns that knowledge, and actually state that you have got or you should state that you have got their permission to actually publish that knowledge. That should be distinguished from you having ethics clearance to undertake studies with Indigenous communities. That's not the same thing as having permission to then publish that knowledge. So just need to be careful of those stages. The NHMRC has the ethical guidelines for research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So that's a really important tool, that guideline that you should pay attention to as well, if it's relevant to your research. Now, let me just go down my notes. When you're discussing what your publication plan is and who's going to be an author and what order of the authorship, you need to also note down a few things, like, do you have the appropriate ethical protocols? What are these ethical protocols? Is there a requirement by the publication to actually record that you have that protocol? And how do you record it? Do you record it by saying this is just, it's been approved by the ANU Human Research Ethics Committee, or do you actually have to contain a protocol number? There are various different requirements according to various different ethics committees. You also need to be willing to take responsibility for what is published. So that includes, if you actually have to correct the research record. Nobody wants to do that, but sometimes you need to do that. Something has come up afterwards that has meant that maybe something in your research actually needs to be amended. You have found a fault with something. There is a situation where is in the newspaper, some researchers in Tasmania found that the data that they were using in a publication was flawed. So they did the right thing. They retracted, they made an amendment to their research record, and they said this data set was had some issues with it, and so we're going to have to address that. Unfortunately, that meant that some people out there jumped on the fact that they did a retraction and started saying, well, this shows that their research isn't very good. So one of the things that's really important too is to ensure that your data sources are of the best quality they can be. And that's part of your responsibility as an author. And with all of these things, record it. You can have an authorship form. There's an authorship form on the ANU Responsible Research Practice website, and it's attached to the authorship policy. But also, you can just do it as an email. You can have an email trail. You just make sure that everybody who is involved is CC'd into that email, and you have it written down so that if issues come up later, you've got it in writing. You want everyone to know what page that you're all on the same page and you all know what the expectations are. Another thing that's really important, and my section's very short here, but really it's building on something that Kuntala said. Check out the journal. Make sure the journal is of high quality. And while you're doing that, also check out, does it have a good reputation in your discipline? What is the journal's peer review process? And also check out who's on the panel. So who is going to be, who's on the editorial board? Because you need to check that there are no actual or apparent conflicts of interest. You might find that, you didn't realise that, but your uncle was on the panel or on the editorial board. That's something that you actually may well need to declare. And your supervisor will be able to guide you on the best way of incorporating that into your paper. But again, this is just part of that kind of background documentation to make sure that you've got all the necessary permissions, you've ticked all the boxes. And it's not, I shouldn't say that really, because it's not a tick box exercise, but it is really worth knowing that you've done everything you possibly can to make sure that you have approached your publication in the appropriate way, so that if anybody ever comes back and say, you know, you have these arguments about authorship, you can actually say, no, we've done this and we've done this and we have it on record. It will save you so much grief. A lot of these things, I know they seem obvious, but this is the cause of so much stress for research, early career students, people after their PhD. It can be it can take up a lot of their time. The other thing I wanted to say too is, yes, you do this in discussion with your research, with your supervisor. However, if you're finding you're not getting the information or the support that you feel that you need, there are research integrity advisors available in the ANU. And you don't have to, every college should have one at the moment. Unfortunately, not every college has a research integrity advisor, but you can go to a research integrity advisor from any college in the university. If you want, if you're working in CAP, but you want to actually talk to somebody about an issue to do with publication or any research integrity issue, you can actually contact somebody from the College of Engineering. You know, you could contact a woman, you can contact a young researcher, you could contact a senior researcher, RIA, you know, whoever you feel the most comfortable with. And you can go and talk to them about the concerns that you have. Their role is not to negotiate, to help you to negotiate. They won't take on that role, but they will tell you what processes are available to you, how you can ensure that you're doing best practice. And at the end of the day, if you can't get a resolution, you can always just put in a submission, or you could just a question to the ANU Research Integrity Office. That's just researchintegrity@anu.edu.au. We can advise you, we can refer you to the right area for advice. It doesn't have to be a huge, I'm making a research misconduct complaint. It can be just, I'm having this issue and I don't know what to do. Can you please direct me to a place where I can actually get some support or some advice? And we're more than happy to do that. And that's me wrapped up, essentially, unless anyone's got any specific questions.
Thanks, Dimity. That was excellent advice, and thanks for providing those insights into all the ethics concerns, which are sometimes a bit hard to grasp at first. There's so much information being thrown at early career researchers and students. So thanks for digesting that for all of us. So I'll open the floor to questions. So you can either unmute yourself and start.
There's a hand from Shell Lyons.
Yeah, hi.
Sorry, I just muted sorry, I muted myself. I was going to say,
I'm not hearing anybody, so I've got a feeling that something's wrong with my screen again.
Yes. Can you hear us? I was going to suggest, if you have a question, just start talking, raise your hand, or put the questions in the Q&A box. We're not going to put questions in the chat box because that's where we're putting links to documents and stuff. So to avoid confusion, just put the questions in the Q&A, not the chat box, or just raise your hand. Thank you.
Okay, well, I have
Michelle.
a question. Yeah, sorry. Thank you to all the panelists for a really interesting talk. I had a question. I've sort of just starting my PhD, but had previously done a research fellowship, and so have just submitted a paper to Energy Research and Social Sciences. And as part of that, I was asked to nominate a number of potential reviewers. And I just wanted to ask the panel if they had any thoughts or advice on, you know, selecting potential reviewers for papers when you're an early career researcher and you don't have an extensive sort of network in the field. I'd just be grateful for any sort of wisdom or guidance they could give.
So I can talk about what I do. Sometimes this is a very strange thing, and it's sometimes if the topic is new, or if an author is new, the journals, if it is your first submission, the journals do ask you to nominate reviewers. It's not common, but it can happen. So what you want to do then is really give the top names, you know, because you can give 4 or they'll need 2 reviews basically, but if you can put in 4 or 5 names, what I do is put the best names, because that's my kind of, you know, I get a confirmation about myself as a scholar. So, well, whether my pants are down or pants are up, you know, that sort of confirmation. So that's what I do. But other people can have other suggestions, you know, like what Ida said. You look at your reference list and see who you have cited, and you know, if you're submitting the article in ERSS, you know that it is relevant for your work. So who are the people who have published on similar topics in ERSS? You know, the top people, then you put their names in.
So similar response. I would say that almost every journal you submit to will ask you for suggested reviewers these days. It's pretty standard operation. I don't remember last time I submitted to a journal that hasn't asked me for a reviewer. There was one, but then the editor emailed me about a day later going, hey, can you suggest reviewers? So I don't know what happened, but and it was fine. I agree with Kuntala that you look at the names that are working in that field, but I would say to split them between the high ranking and the low ranking, sort of early and high career. And the reason is odds are that the high career won't agree to do it. I get about 3 reviews requests a day. I say no to 95% of them. I do about 1 a week, 2 a week. It depends how busy I am, 1 every 2 weeks kind of thing. And basically, I say no to most of them. I have a colleague who's high level and he gets more than that. And he just says no to 99% of them, I would say. And so most people will say no. So I would say, yeah, it's great to suggest the high level reviewers. Odds are it'll just make the review process longer because they'll say no. And then the editor will have to go look for others. Early careers in your field will just be more likely to review it, and they might have interesting comments, and odds are they won't be as cruel because they haven't gotten into that habit yet. So I would say kind of split that and just look, stick into Google Scholar what the topic of your paper is and see who comes up with a lot of reviews basically. So which papers are most similar and, you know, who's been cited a lot, and try them. So.
Thank you. That's sort of what I did. So that's very reassuring.
Okay, great. Kathy?
Kathy. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, great. Really interesting discussion. I had a question. I'm sort of in the middle of my PhD and I'm hoping to publish, and I've got what I think is probably a series of papers, because, you know, you can't fit all, it's more a conceptual theoretical PhD. You obviously can't fit all the ideas into one paper, but it's almost in a sequence where you've got the kind of first idea and it builds on that, and it's easier to write the second paper once you've introduced the first idea. And any tips on how you manage that kind of process where you're expecting to do 2 or 3 papers, and how you might sequence, or how you might sort of manage that process or relate the papers to each other and that kind of thing? Any tricks or issues to avoid?
Kuntala, do you want to go first, or do you want me to answer?
Yeah, I can just give you an example, Kathy, that with a younger colleague, I did some field work. My work is mainly field work based. So did some field work in one part of India, central India, very deep, full of forests and all that. And so we decided that, how we will draft. So we decided that I will draft one paper and I'll be the lead author. He'll draft another paper and he'll be the lead author. And this is how we will go. And basically divided the, by the time he was able to draft his paper, our first article had been published. So we were able to cite it. but self-plagiarism, we were very careful about not, not using chunks of text in the second paper. This is called self-plagiarism, and it is also a kind of plagiarism. It's not a good thing to do. It doesn't, somebody who has read your first article, person who's reviewing knows that area, that topic, and so that person has already read your first paper. You can imagine, because she or he is specialized in that field. And then they see that, oh, she is just churning out the same thing. And so I know of people who just tweak the words and has published probably 10 articles on the same topic. There are these types as well, but I don't want to do that. And I don't know what Ida would say. Let's listen to Ida, because in doing this work, in following this principle, my basket of work has become wider and wider as well.
So I agree that, you're not republishing the same stuff, and that's not what you implied. You implied stuff that's built on it. But keep in mind that no matter what you're publishing, you're building on something, right? And whether it's your own work or somebody else's work, you're building on something. That's why you have a lit review in the beginning and a background. And that's why you have a shitload of citations right up front, because you're building on that stuff. Right? It's not like this is completely new and nothing related is out there to your work. And so I would consider that previous paper you published in that same mind frame of it's literature that's out there. You happen to write it, but it could have been somebody else that wrote it, right? And then you're saying, I'm building on this previously published literature, and that's fine. And so I've had students who, for example, one paper, they wrote a framework for something, and the next one they implemented that framework on the ground, right? And so they said, well, looking at this framework that's been published, here is how an implementation would go. And it might have been somebody else who published that framework, and they still might do the same thing. So it shouldn't matter whether you're the one publishing the first paper or not. You're just building on it like you're building on dozens of other people's work. And the same way you cite their papers, you cite your own. And so that's why you often see, people self-cite. So when I started a PhD and I was pretty new to this publishing thing, I remember laughing at my supervisor going, you're just citing yourself. Like, what's that about, right? And then as I've gotten into it, I kind of get why that happens, is because most often you are building on your own work, right? And you are you have a project and you do part of it, and then you do the next part of it and the next part of it, and you keep citing yourself because that's the most relevant thing, instead of talking, saying, and this is what we did, and this is what we did. You just cite it. So it's made more sense to me over the years. So don't be afraid to cite yourself and saying, I'm working, and you don't have to say, I'm working on my previous work. You just say, I'm working on this previously published work, period. So
would Dimity want to say anything, or can I address one of the questions put in the chat box?
No, yes, you go ahead.
Can I just say something before you change topic? Sorry to jump in. Ida, feel free to correct me. So I finished my PhD at ANU last year, and Ida was one of my supervisors. And my plan had been to do a PhD by compilation and to have a series of papers. The way I structured that meant that the papers really needed to be published in order for each subsequent paper to go out. And that became really problematic for me. And about 6 months before I submitted, I realized I wasn't going to be able to do a PhD by compilation if I wanted to submit in a timely manner. So I guess my advice to you, if that's what you're thinking and you're a bit earlier in the process than I was, is to, if you can cite, like I just described, absolutely do that, but don't make your PhD dependent on being able to cite the earlier papers.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, otherwise you'll end up with this freak out moment 6 months before you submit where you're like, I can't do what I thought I was going to do. So I think it's totally manageable, but just, yeah, try not to make them dependent on each one going beforehand.
I totally agree.
Very good experience. Thanks for sharing. Ida, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that's totally agreed on that. And sorry, I don't know where you're coming from, so I can't comment directly on your PhD. But for example, in Mitzi's case, which I know because I was on her panel, it just, if she were to publish, she would delay her PhD. And the priority is to get the PhD out there, get your PhD done, and then worry about everything else later. That's the goal, right? Your overall goal. And Mitzi can go on and publish now, whether it's a book or whether it's papers, that's up to her, how she wants to do that. But your first priority is not to get publications out. And I think getting publications out is critical in a PhD. Don't get me wrong, but that's not your first priority. Your first priority is to get a PhD, period.
Yes, totally agree. And another thing that I would just add to that important point Ida has just said, remember that a paper can take anything between 1 to 2 years. You know, by the time you finish writing that paper, get it edited, checked up and all that, when you submit, it can take. There are many slips between the cup and the lip. So you cannot make the mistake that Mitzi was, sharing with us, that, waiting on the first publication, then citing it. No, the gestation time is very long. Can be very long in our social science area as well. So I just wanted to address one question that Vijeta has put forth in the chat box. Vijeta, there are some journals. What you write in the cover letter? First of all, the one thing that we all write, that I'm, so happy to submit this article for publication, for consideration for publication in your journal. And then I say that I want to say that this is my original work and it has not been submitted anywhere else. That's another thing you must say. It's a common thing. You cannot submit an article in 2 places. That's an unethical. It's a no, absolute no. It's a bad thing to do. Okay. So then what I do is that I say a few words about my paper, few lines, that this paper is about this and it suits your journal's mission and vision. Almost all journals say that these aims and scope of the journal in their website, they say that this journal is about this. This is my field. And then you basically say how it fits into that field. That's what you say. Your article has a title and you know all about it, but the editor, when she's reading it, she has no idea about what it is. So if you want to say why what it is about and why you think it's really ideally suitable for that journal, one journal I published in Antipode, it does that. Antipode asks you, explain why you submitted this journal in our in this article in our journal, but not others do. They don't ask you explicitly, but that's always implicitly in the back of the mind of the editor who's going to handle your paper. Does it address your point, Vijeta?
Yes, thank you very much, Kuntala. Thank you.
And I was going to address the point somebody's asked about conflict of interest and how that might limit or restrict the pool of potential reviewers. Conflict of interest, or declaring conflict of interest, what you're actually doing is declaring what could be or what might look like to somebody else to be a conflict of interest, that you may actually be getting some type of benefit from that relationship. What you need to do is just look at it and just declare, yes, this may be a concern. I have worked with this person in the past, but I think it's really more to do with more clear cut. It becomes a problem when it's a more clear cut issue, when it's a more clear cut matter of you benefiting from that relationship. If so, you do know that person, they should actually declare a conflict of interest too, and they should make sure then that they are not going to review your paper, but they could refer it to somebody else to review. I think it's difficult to actually say, because I do think you need to actually address it as a case-by-case basis. And that's something that you would certainly want to discuss with your supervisor or with a research integrity advisor. They'll be able to help you out with that. But I do understand that these types of issues can actually come up when you're in a very specific area and you have a small amount of people who can actually review your paper. It's not previous relationships so much, it's really to do with what kind of advantage do you gain or would they gain? And again, like I said, it's the perception. Would someone perceive there to be a conflict of interest here? And just think that through and then think about how you would address that. And that will probably give you the next step. Kuntala, do you agree?
Yes, I do. But I'm also thinking about the citing yourself comment in the chat box. You know, I submitted an article in, and this is really important and critical for most of us who are in human geography or anthropology, softer social sciences, who write in the first person singular number. So when I say that I did this, entered the field and, and all that. I presented myself as this, woman of color in Indonesia, for example, And then I say in similar situations, Lahiri-Dutt did this. So very easy. In a journal, Feminist Review, when I submitted that article, what the assistant of the handling editor did is turn them into black, kind of, put a black, can't be read, those sorts of, so self-citations were blackened out in that journal. I don't know whether that's good or not. I don't think it is good, but yeah, that's how they handle it.
Yeah, thanks, Kuntala. I understand that different journals have different guidelines and different styles, and so it may be a case of just looking at a journal by journal basis and just looking at past examples of other papers that have been published there, whether they tend to use that generic language and that passive tense, or they do publish that like we or I, first person sort of discourse. Any more? I know we've the time's flown with all the really good insights and questions. I'll obviously give the floor to the students and early career researchers to ask more questions. Otherwise, we'll probably have to close it up.
Just for the whole thing, I think it depends on your own personal style of writing. I don't think journals care that much what style you take. To tell you the truth, it matters more on your personal style of writing. Some people write in passive, some people write in active. So I personally think that active reads a lot better and it's a lot more efficient in terms of words. I don't tend to use I or we I do on occasion, but I try to avoid it because I try to make it about the research and not about myself or the authors. And it depends on your own personal style and what you're comfortable with. And some writing styles work for some people, and some writing styles work for different people. And it's also will be based on what field you're publishing in, because fields have sort of different standards per se. But at the end of the day, I think a journal will publish it regardless whether if it's well written, whether it's passive or active or uses first person or third person. So I wouldn't be too concerned as long as you're sure that it's a well written paper and it's well understood kind of thing.
Thanks, Ida. Any more questions? I have a few, but I can email the panelists and maybe set a time to catch a virtual coffee.
Why don't you go ahead and ask them, and who can stay, and then those that can't stay.
We can do that. If anyone has to go, please feel free to leave. We're not gonna feel offended.
And some people might be interested. So
yeah. So I have a question now. There's a lot of journals that encourage submissions with either graphical abstracts or video abstracts, and for those of us who are not artistically talented, that can be very time consuming and even actually not do the paper great favors. I wanted to hear your thoughts on the cost benefits of putting time and effort in graphical and video abstracts.
Yeah, I had a terrible experience. So I published an article in a journal, and they wanted me to talk about the article in a video abstract. So and what do you do in a video abstract? Field-based work. And so I talked about what the paper is and showed a little bit of visuals and all that. And then it was a nightmare to transfer that video file. 3 minutes video file, it's not easy. So yeah, we transfer and so on. And then they never published it because you don't know, it takes a lot of time. And so another time after that, bad experience, when somebody asked me to do a video abstract, I just refused, that it's a waste of time.
I don't tend to do them primarily because, like Kuntala said, they do take time, and I'd rather put that time into writing a conversation piece or a guardian piece or something that's going to be read by more people. The other thing is, even if the journal publishes them, they don't really have an avenue of publicizing or doing anything with them. And so they just kind of sit on the website next to the paper, which I find a bit pointless, because if you're going through the paper, you're going to read the abstract and look at the figures anyway. So what's the point at the end of the day, unless they do something with it? So I'd rather put that time into a conversation piece or some kind of for public piece.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have anything to say on that.
Okay.
Can I just ask another question?
Yes,
So
sure.
of the different metrics, if there's a journal that has like a high metric in one of the, for example, it's like Q1 I usually use the CIMAGO journal and country rank, and you can have a journal that's Q1 there, but it's ranked low with a high index. How would you choose from one or the other, or how?
I personally don't care about metrics. I don't think I've ever looked at the ARC Australia metrics because I don't care. I publish not for the university. I publish for myself and to make a difference in the world. And how the university ranks it is less on my concern level. And so the high impact journals, the reason they're high impact, usually like Nature or Science, is because they take your journal article and they publicize it. They send it to New York Times, they send it to Washington Post. It gets reads on more general papers, and then people go back and look at the paper and cite it. I have an extensive mailing list. I usually, some of my cool papers, I send out to those, and I find those get much higher citations. I tend to not concern myself with metrics. If it, I make sure it has an impact factor, that it's an ISI, it's a decent journal. But otherwise than that, I personally don't care. So, and Kuntala will.
Good point. I totally agree with Ida. This is something I can secretly, I wouldn't say that I can give this advice to ECRs and PhD students. I would say that you publish in high quality journals and, look at the impact factor. But yeah, I agree with Ida that I don't. My audience is very different. I work on India. They're based in India. So what's the point in, they can't access, these expensive articles that are behind a firewall. So, many European universities are nowadays putting money in the hands of academics to make their journals open access. So when I publish an article, when I do the author agreement form and all that, absolutely at the final stage when the paper has been accepted, there is an option they give that would you like to make it open access? If you say yes, then they'll charge you, $2,000 or $3,000. So many European universities are actually making these open access. But again, you're really paying for publishing your work. Put a bit more value on yourself. Why would you, I publish in open access journals, and two of my books have been from ANU Press, which is open access, anyone can download. I sit on the editorial board of open access journals and so on. So I really agree with Ida that our work, we are getting salary. Our work is, they are publishing. It's an industry that's like a leech, academic industry, university system, and then the publishing industry is sitting on us like a, sucking our, blood or surviving on that, so we need to resist. But how much of that can be done by early career researchers, young researchers? Probably no. So just get somewhere and then do your political acts. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Kat, do you want to add any remarks, or someone else wants to ask questions? Well, if there are no more questions, I'll thank the panelists and all the attendees for the really fruitful conversation. Thanks very much for your advice, for the time and the passion that you shared with us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for
Thank you
organizing.
very much.
Thanks
everyone
for having us. It was great.